diabetic neuropathy and identifying zebras among horses. So basically, this question was asked to prime our thoughts about how we deal with medical diseases. So basically, what is brown has got 4 legs and you can sit on it. If you thought it's a horse, you are mistaken, it's a chair. So this question is very important from the perspective of diabetic neuropathy, because when you are primed saying that the patient has got neuropathy, or rather when you are primed with the patient has got diabetes, and then the patient expresses neuropathy, the first thought is to think that the patient has got diabetic neuropathy. So basically, zebras among horses means that you are trying to identify certain conditions which may look like diabetes neuropathy, but it's not diabetic neuropathy. Just to run through the basic stuff, diabetic neuropathy is probably the most common complication of diabetes, and it can even be the first presentation of patients with type 2 diabetes. Many of us have seen patients coming with severe neuropathy and then getting identified as having diabetes. It's quite a common condition depending on the method how you use to detect diabetic neuropathy. And if you look at the traditional description of diabetic neuropathy, it says that you need to have a demonstrable disorder with either clinically evident or having subclinical nature without other causes of peripheral neuropathy. So basically, when you define diabetic neuropathy, at least for some patients, you need to rule out other causes which may look like diabetic neuropathy. So why is it important to identify diabetic neuropathy? Quality of life issues, severe pain, disturbing sleep, stuff like that. Patients can have foot ulcers, foot deformities, Charcot's foot, non-traumatic amputations, things like that, which can impair the quality of life for the patient. General classification, for the completeness, you have symmetrical and on one side, symmetrical neuropathy on one side, and you have focal and multifocal neuropathy on the other. When you have symmetrical neuropathy, it's usually the traditional distal symmetrical peripheral neuropathy. I'll probably be touching only on this entity. Then we have the other rarer causes like hyperglycemic neuropathy in patients who have very high blood sugars. They have sort of tingling sensations all over the body or in the distal extremities. There's an acute painful sensory variant of this. You have the focal neuropathies, which can be cranial neuropathies, the focal limb neuropathies, thoracolumbar radiculoneuropathies, or the lumbosacral radiculopathy. These are all neuropathies which are unusual neuropathies. So just coming to the basic stuff, this is a distal symmetrical peripheral neuropathy. It's probably the most common form of neuropathy. Lower limb is the predominant area. It usually comes in the tips of fingers. It progresses upwards. The symptoms are all very common to you. Symptoms are most pronounced in the night, and burning pain can be exacerbated by contact. And if you try to divide it, the distal peripheral neuropathy is actually a combination of small fiber neuropathy and large fiber neuropathy. Small fiber neuropathy is supposed to be affecting the first thing. So you have all the symptoms like superficial burning pain, allodynia, hyperalgesia, all the symptoms were happening. When you check, you have impaired temperature and pain sensation. You have autonomic symptoms like reduced sweating. But when you look at the strength, there's normal muscle power, reflexes are normal, and you do a nerve conduction, the nerve traditional conduction shows a normal thing. But other one is the large fiber neuropathy. You have the impaired vibration perception, deep-seated gnawing pain. There you have a component of motor component happening, wasting of small muscles, weakness. You have increased risk for Charcot's foot. So depending on whether it's predominantly a small fiber neuropathy or a large fiber neuropathy, the patient will express the symptoms to you. Running to the other causes of neuropathy, the cranial neuropathy, the 3rd, 4th and 6th nerves commonly affected. Focal neuropathies, entrapment neuropathies like carpal tunnel syndrome, the tarsal tunnel syndrome, mononeuritis, either singly or as multiplex. Truncal radiculoneuropathy, when you have a dermatomal distribution of pain over the trunk, you may have muscle weakness with bulging of muscles. Sometimes patient goes unidentified for many years before you realize it's truncal neuropathy. Hyperglycemic neuropathy and autonomic neuropathy. So these are the general classification of neuropathy. And when it comes to diabetic neuropathy as a disease, the symptoms actually occupy only a tip of the iceberg. And if you go into more advanced investigations, you see more and more cases emerging as diabetic neuropathy. How do you examine patients? I'm not going into the details. The appearance, look at if you have monofilaments, you can use it, very useful stuff. Vibration with a tuning fork, deep tendon reflexes, position sense, all the traditional neurological stuff. I'm not going into details. But the fact remains, and the topic for today is that not all neuropathies in diabetes is diabetic neuropathy. So if you look at different data on how far you investigated the patients, Studies have shown that from anything from 10% to even 50% of the patients may have another cause for neuropathy despite having diabetes. So it's very important that you identify the other cause of neuropathy in this patient, because some of these causes may be potentially treatable and reversible. But it's not practically possible to go through the entire gamut of investigations for each patient who comes to you. So you need to pull out or select patients from among the diabetic patients who you have to decide which patients will require a particular investigation. So this is the entire list of causes, differential diagnosis of causes for symmetrical polyneuropathies. You don't need to look at all those things. So why is the differential diagnosis very important? One, as I told you, patients can have non-diabetic neuropathies. Second, you can have potentially treatable or reversible causes may be present which you can identify. You may be having an underlying severe major disorder like a vasculitic disorder or a paraneoplastic syndrome, which you may miss if you don't identify correctly. And cranial neuropathies may be a sign of intracranial space occupying lesions. So a lot of reasons why you should look for another cause of neuropathy in a patient with diabetes. Now coming to a few cases, just to go through some of the ways in which we look at things. The first is an 18-year-old lady with type 1 diabetes. Patient is on a basal bolus insulin, reasonably controlled blood sugars, 7 to 7.5%. He's got hypothyroidism well replaced, complaints of peripheral painful paresthesias, an imbalance since 1 year, no nephropathy, no retinopathy, examination, angle jerks are absent, impaired position and vibration sense, extensor plantar, normal muscle power. So what features in this patient will make you think that there is some other reason, underlying reason in this patient? So these are some of the red flags which I have put up. One is patient having type 1 diabetes, patient having hypothyroidism, one more disease, one more autoimmune disease. The patient has got, at least in patients with type 1 diabetes, most of them have a combination of different microvascular combinations. So this patient has got neuropathy, but does not have retinopathy or nephropathy, and she's got an extensor plantar. So all these things, extensor plantar, as you are aware, is a sign of upper motor neuron disease. So you have lot of symptoms or signs or suspicions which make you feel that this patient may be having something else happening. And this is how the investigations look like. You have a B12 which is reduced. You have the FODATE levels which are normal, the ANA negative, celiac screen is negative, smear is normal, and anti-parietal cell antibody is positive. So basically you have a patient who has got vitamin B12 deficiency masquerading as diabetic neuropathy coming to you. You can treat this patient easily with vitamin B12 and folate, and you have the patient recovering and back to normal. So just to touch upon how B12 deficiency acts on the nervous system, B12 deficiency in fact affects almost everything in the nervous system, starting from the dorsal columns to the lateral corticospinal tracts, peripheral nerves, cortical structures, and the entire thing is affected by B12 deficiency. And you have a nerve conduction which shows axonal sensory neuropathy. It's reversible in early stages. But the fact you should take home is that if you have B12 deficiency, you cannot just have pernicious anemia, or you cannot just have macrocytosis. You can have isolated neurological involvement without having a peripheral blood involvement. Because a lot of time you do a peripheral smear, say it's okay, it's fine. So it's unlikely to have B12 deficiency. And I'm not going to the details, but B12 levels alone may not really show the real cutoffs which you get from laboratories, may not be the sort of B12 levels which can cause B12 deficiency, because even if you have B12s in the lower limit of normal within the range, still you should have a clinical suspicion. It's better to treat these patients with B12 if you don't have facilities for further investigations. Look at the MRI. You can see a demyelination happening in different areas in the spinal cord, the demyelinated areas. So these are features of B12 deficiency. Now coming to the second case. This is an elderly gentleman, exactly opposite. You have type 2 diabetes in 6 years. Patient is on twice daily premixed insulin, fairly well controlled, 6.5 to 7.5. Again, no neuropathy, no nephropathy. He is known to have some numbness of foot since 1 year. But since 6 months, he is having problems with fine movements of the hands. He's got some small muscle atrophy. If you look at the reflexes, he's got a lost biceps and supinator jerks. Triceps is hyperreflexic. Knee is hyperreflexic. Tone seems to be increased in the limbs, and plantar is extensor. So you have a patient who is elderly, having features of peripheral neuropathy with certain red flag signs. He's got upper limb involvement before significant lower limb involvement. This is quite unusual in patients with typical diabetic neuropathy. You need to have sort of numbness and sensory symptoms up to the knee before you start having symptoms in the hand. So this again feature against a diabetic neuropathy. those diabetic neuropathies, and most of these neuropathies are length-dependent neuropathies. You have hand muscle atrophy, again quite common unless you have significant neuropathy involving diabetes. Motor involvement. Before significant sensory involvement, he is having motor involvement and upper motor neuron signs and extensor plantar. Again, you have a patient who does not fit in the typical description of a diabetic peripheral neuropathy. And this is the MRI of the neck showing multiple discs compressing the cord, and you have a cervical myeloradiculopathy happening. So you are a 70-year-old man who's got some symptoms of peripheral neuropathy, but a lot of other symptoms suggesting that the neuropathy may not be really diabetic neuropathy. I'll go to the third case. Again, a 50-year-old gentleman, a middle-aged person, insulin and oral hypoglycemic agents, reasonably controlled sugars. He's known to have peripheral neuropathy earlier, documented when he went to a diabetes clinic and a vibration threshold was done. But since 4 months, he's not able to hold his slippers. Leg paresthesia is worsening over 4 months. Difficulty in climbing stairs. No bowel bladder involvement. He's got absent ankle jerk, knee jerk, plantar flexor. He's got proximal and distal muscle weakness and hypertonia. So again, this patient, he's got peripheral neuropathy, diabetic peripheral neuropathy to start, but something else seems to be showing up. He seems to be having a rapid progression of symptoms despite having a reasonably good glycemic control. Quite unusual to have diabetic neuropathy progressing over 4 months, 6 months in patients if the sugars are well controlled. Predominant motor involvement, proximal muscle weakness, profound areflexia and hypertonia. So again, this patient has undergone a nerve conduction study and he was found to have a CIDP. So these are patients, again, who don't fit into the typical diabetic neuropathy evolution pattern with regarding to the speed of symptoms. So just coming to CIDP, again, an uncommon entity, but quite common in the neurology circles. It's an immune-mediated demyelinating neuropathy, more common in patients with diabetes than in non-diabetic population. It's sensory motor neuropathy, but usually the motor symptoms predominate over the sensory symptoms. And you can have anything from gait to cranial nerve involvement. And typically you need a nerve conduction velocity, a nerve conduction test to find out whether this patient has got CIDP. The importance of identifying CIDP in diabetic neuropathy is a potentially treatable condition where you can use steroids, IVIG or plasma exchange for these patients. So this is again a differential diagnosis. Now coming to diabetic amyotrophy. I'm not going to the case as such. Diabetic amyotrophy, in the description it is a lumbosacral radiculoplexoneuropathy, where basically you have the involvement of the nerve roots, the nerve plexus and the nerves. All three are involved. So basically it's an ischemic damage which happened and it's believed to be a multifocal immune mediated process. So you have typical presentation as the pain in the hip, buttock or thigh and weight loss, usually associated with a very poor glycemic control. And you have predominant muscle involvement, the motor involvement, and some sensory involvement in terms of absent knee jerk. And the clinical course is again 6 months to 3 years. And these patients have very good improvement when you put these patients on an intensive glycemic control. So it's even though it's unusual, you occasionally see these cases. But being an endocrinologist, I realized that I cannot keep these cases and treat them myself, because these patients with diabetic amyotrophy can have a list of other differential diagnoses which are more serious. It can be an infiltrative disorder, it can be a paraneoplastic disease, it can be a vasculitic disease. So these are things which I may miss in my practice, and so it's very important that when you see a diabetic amyotrophy, you need to refer these patients to a neurologist for a proper workup. And even they may be having a spinal compressive lesion which may be decompressed and the patient can improve. So a lot of differential can evolve. So when you see a patient, what is suggested as the sort of basic workup for a patient with diabetic neuropathy? You don't need to do all this test in all the patients, but if you have any suspicion of a reversible cause or some other cause happening, it's good to do a workup. You can do a B12 and folate levels. You can do a serum electrophoresis. You have entire paraproteinemic associated neuropathies. You can exclude vasculitic neuropathies with this other tests like ANA and rheumatoid factor, stuff like that. Thyroid function, hypothyroidism, CBC, ESR, renal functions and liver functions, renal dysfunction, chronic renal failure, all these things can have neuropathy. So you need to have basic workup for a lot of your patients with neuropathy, especially if you are suspecting any of the secondary causes. And when do you want to perform a nerve conduction for these patients? So basically, if you have a predominant motor involvement or substantial motor involvement, if the patient has got a family history, you may be dealing with a hereditary sensory motor neuropathy. If you are having an entrapment neuropathy, it's better to send to a neurologist, get a nerve conduction done. You may be doing it for one hand, or you may be finding it in one hand. The patient may have mononeuritis multiplex in different areas. Rapid progression of symptoms, very unusual for a patient with diabetic neuropathy to have rapid progression. Asymmetric neuropathy, again unusual feature. Disproportionate upper limb involvement with minimum of lower limb involvement. Again, features which should make you think that you are dealing with a neuropathy other than diabetic neuropathy. So all these features, just to sum up, when you think, you need to think beyond diabetic neuropathy, when you have all these features which I just told, like if you have a rapid progression, predominant motor involvement, autonomic system involvement predominant, you may have mild tingling neuropathy, significant autonomic dysfunction. You are probably not dealing with diabetic neuropathy. Bowel bladder involvement, very unusual in diabetic neuropathy patients. Proximal muscle involvement. I told you diabetic amyotrophy, it can happen, but it can be something else also. Upper limb involvement. Again, these are all things which you should always suspect. So just coming to the end of my talk, diabetes, as you are aware, can affect the nervous system through various levels. But not all neuropathies in diabetes is peripheral neuropathy, diabetic peripheral neuropathy. And always look for some red flag signs which you may come across, and this reason to refer to the neurologist. Do basic investigations, do a nerve conduction, again, probably with the help of a neurologist. And whenever you have a doubt, refer. So I think there was a traditional saying in our undergraduate days, when you hear hoofbeats, think of a horse and not of a zebra. But there are certain instances now when you realize there can quite be a lot of zebras among the horses, and you need to identify them. I'd like to thank Dr. Suresh Chandran and Dr. Anas Majid from KIMS Neurology for helping me put up these slides. Thank you very much once more.
Thank you, Matthew. I've been told no questions, but then I would like to ask you one question. So many practical problems. We see patients on vitamins. How effective is it? When should you start the vitamins? How much should you give?
I think ADA as such does not recommend any vitamins. ADA as such does not recommend any vitamins for anyone with diabetes, unless if you want to use something, you probably use it in a patient, elderly patient who does not take enough food, or you have a nutritional deficiency. Otherwise, no vitamins.
No, questions are allowed. I've been told.
One comment about the vitamins.
Yes, sir.
In JAMA 2011.
Yes.
Let me have my
Mike.
I think it is in JAMA 2011 July. There is a multi-center study done on using vitamins in diabetes. They found that this was the first author was Daniel Catron. It was a North American study. They very clearly showed that those who were taking vitamins, they had much more decline in renal function compared to those who were not taking vitamins. So I think that there should be a caution in taking vitamins, because this was a multi-center study done for more than 8 years, suggesting that vitamins are harmful for renal function in patients with renal failure.
What is the reason for that, sir?
They don't say that. It was a multi-center longitudinal study done. They couldn't say that. B1, B6, all these give us a use vitamins only when it is necessary.
How does chloride damage the kidney? Will this sustain it? No, Dr. Matthew John, I think you spoke better than the neurologist. I think this should have been talked by a neurologist. But I think another situation is that metformin can produce B12 deficiency and possibly neuropathy. The other thing which I want to ask you is checking folate relevant? Folate does not produce any neurological defect except in the pregnant patient to prevent a neural tube defect.
Yeah, it's probably not less of neurological things, but if you have a patient with a pernicious anemia sort of picture, it can either be produced by a folate or a B12 deficiency. And most of the time, it's probably checked together, but I try to do only B12. I don't know why it's being checked together. Most of the doctors I've seen order for both together, especially the hematology people. I think, I don't know, maybe physicians can clarify that. Sunil, you want to?
Macrocytic anemia can be due to both, but you said you can have neurology without anemia.
Yes, you can have either way. You can have any presentation.
Any more questions? Srijit is here. vitamin D3. What about vitamin D3?
You mean vitamin D? Again, I think despite lot of talks about vitamin D, the evidence really linking vitamin D to any of the outcomes seems to be very weak, except for bone health outcomes. So I wouldn't do it as a sort of blanket treatment for anyone, but someone who is checked. Now most of the patients are checking by themselves vitamin D levels. But if you need to have a musculoskeletal skin symptom and you need to check and you find out deficiency, yes, you treat. Otherwise, even though it's a cheap or a easy treatment, I don't recommend as a blanket vitamin D treatment for anyone.
Any more questions? From nephrology point of view, I tell them some of them will be taking vitamin D for long. And they'll ask me if I forget to prescribe, shouldn't I be taking it? And I tell them, if you take in excess, it goes in the urine. So it's up to you. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for such a nice talk. And once again, I wish to thank Jyotidev and his team for giving us this opportunity, having brought this to Trivandrum, to God's own country. Thank you, Jyoti.